everyone. Okay, so clearly I am not in my house and I am not at our classroom. I am in a friend of mine's classroom that I just needed because it's a long story, but I'm just in someone else's classroom today and Miss Holmes is just not feeling 100% for the next few days, so I just had to be here. Sorry about that. Okay, we are on the next chapter of Chronicles of Narnia. If you guys remember, Edmund was a snake just now, and some of you guys had really good predictions for like what was gonna happen. I was like, you guys should be authors, like nice job. Okay, so we are on chapter 10, and I have to tell you guys, like when I was like, I kind of just like was like flipping, I was like, what part are we doing? And I was like, oh, we're at this part. Like this is a really good chapter. Okay, so here we go. We're going to start, and we don't have lights. Maybe could I sorry, I guess I could do like, oh, Cameron, you emailed me. I'll email you back. I guess I could do like my phone flight. Now it just looks like I'm in a concert and I'm like, go us. Okay, sorry, so no light because there's no lamps in here. She needs to get some lamps in here. Here we go. Chapter 10, the spell begins to break, okay? Now we must go back to Mr. and Mrs. Beaver and the 3 other children. As soon as Mr. Beaver said, "There's no time to lose," everyone began bundling themselves into coats except Mrs. Beaver, who started picking up sacks and laying them on the table. Okay, because remember, they're like, the White Witch is definitely coming. Like, they guessed that even before, like, we found out Edmund was a snake and told. When is he going to learn about this country's no snitching policy? Although I guess that's the U.S. The U.S. has a no snitching policy, and they're British, so maybe that's it. But maybe Narnia has a no snitching policy too. When is he going to learn? Okay. There's no time to lose. Everyone began bundling themselves into coats except Mrs. Beaver, who started picking up sacks and laying them on the table and said, "Now, Mr. Beaver, just reach down that ham, and there's a packet of tea, and there's sugar and some matches, and if someone will go get 2 or 3 loaves out of the crock over there in the corner." So she's like trying to pack food. "What are you doing, Mrs. Beaver?" exclaimed Susan. "Packing a load for each of us, dearie." She's like trying to pack food for them. "You don't think we'd set on a journey with nothing to eat, do you?" "But we haven't time," said Susan, buttoning up the collar of her coat. "She may be here any minute." "That's what I say," chimed in Mr. Beaver. "Get along with you all," said his wife. "Think it over, Mr. Beaver. She can't be here for a quarter of an hour at least." So, quarter of an hour, how long is quarter of an hour? 15 minutes. "But don't we want as big of a start as we can possibly get," said Peter, "if we're going to reach the stone table before her?" "You've got to remember that, Mrs. Beaver," said Susan. "As soon as she's looked in here and finds we're gone, she'll be off at top speed." "That she will," said Mrs. Beaver, "but we can't get there before her whatever we're doing, and she'll be on a sled and we'll be walking." So she's saying that's true, but she's going to be in a sled and we're going to be walking. "Then have we no hope?" said Susan. "Now don't go fussing over that, dear," said Mrs. Beaver, "but get half a dozen clean handkerchiefs out of the drawer. Course we've got hope. We can't get there before her, but we can keep under cover and go by ways she won't expect, and perhaps we'll get through." So she's saying the White Witch will definitely beat us there. Like, she's got a sled, she can move faster than us, but we can be sneakier and kind of like slip around her. And don't you start fussing either, Mr. Beaver," said his wife. "There, that's better. There's 5 loads and the smallest for the smallest of us. That's you, my dear," she added, looking at Lucy. "Oh, do please come on," said Lucy. "Well, I'm nearly ready now," answered Mrs. Beaver. "I suppose this sewing machine's too heavy to bring?" "Yes, it is," said Mr. Beaver. "A great deal too heavy. And you don't think you'll be able to use it while we're on the run, I suppose." So he's like, "Why would you take your sewing machine? We're on the run. You're not going to be sewing." "I can't abide the thought of that witch finding it." "Oh, please, please, please hurry," said the 3 children. And so at last they all got outside, and Mr. Beaver locked the door, and they set off, all carrying their loads over their shoulders. The snow had stopped, and the moon had come out when they began their journey. They went in single file. First Mr. Beaver, then Lucy, then Peter, then Susan, and Mrs. Beaver last of all. Mr. Beaver led them across the dam and on the right bank of the river, and then along a very rough sort path, among the trees right down by the river bank. "Best keep down here as much as possible," he said. "She'll have to keep to the top, for you can't bring a sled down here." So they're like, there's a hill, and you can go down the hill, and there's a river. And he's like, we need to stay kind of close to here because the queen can't bring a whole sled down here. So we've got to kind of stay down here. It would have been pretty enough to look at through a window from a comfortable armchair, and even as things were, Lucy enjoyed it at first, but as they went on, walking and walking and walking, and as the sack she was carrying felt heavier and heavier, she began to wonder how she was going to keep up at all, and she stopped looking at the dazzling brightness of the frozen river with all its waterfalls of ice, and at the white masses of the treetops. Mr. Beaver going pad, pad, pad through the snow with his short legs. Then the moon disappeared, and the snow began to fall once more. And at last Lucy was so tired that she was almost asleep and walking at the same time, when suddenly she found that Mr. Beaver had turned away from the riverbank to the right and was leading them steeply uphill into the thickest bushes. And then as she came fully awake, she found that Mr. Beaver was just vanishing into a little hole in the bank, which had almost been hidden under the bushes until you were quite on top of it. In fact, by the time she realized what was happening, only his short, flat tail was showing. Lucy immediately stooped down and crawled in after him, so he's kind of gone in and hidden somewhere. Then she heard noises of scrambling and puffing and panting behind her, and in a moment, all 5 of them were inside. "Wherever is this?" said Peter's voice, sounding tired and pale in the darkness. I hope you know what I mean by the voice being pale. I don't know what he means by the voice sounding pale. I really don't know what he means. "It's an old hiding place for beavers in bad times," said Mr. Beaver, "and a great secret. It's not much of a place, but we must go get a few hours of sleep." So this is a place where beavers will hide a lot, and he's like, we just need to stay here to sleep for a few hours. "If you hadn't all been in such a fuss when we were starting, I'd have brought some pillows," said Mrs. Beaver. It wasn't nearly as nice as a cave as Mr. Tumnus's, Lucy thought, just a hole in the ground with some dry earth. It was very small, so that when they all lay down, they were all a bundle of clothes together, and what with that and being warmed up from their long walk, they were really rather snug. If only the floor of the cave had been a little smoother. Then Mrs. Beaver handed around in the dark a little flask out of which everyone drank something, and made one cough and splutter a little, and stung the throat, but also made you feel deliciously warm after you swallowed it, and he went straight to sleep. It seemed to Lucy only the next minute, though really it had been hours and hours later, when she woke up feeling a little cold and dreadfully stiff, thinking how she would like a hot bath. And then she felt a set of long whiskers tickling her cheek and saw the cold daylight coming in through the mouth of the cave. But immediately after that she was very wide awake indeed, and so was everyone else. In fact, I love this part. In fact, they were all sitting up with their mouths and eyes wide opening, listening to the sound, which was the very sound they'd all been thinking of, and sometimes imagining that they had heard during their walk last night. It was the sound of jingling bells. So they're hearing bells. Mr. Beaver was out of the cave like a flash the moment he heard it. Perhaps you think, as Lucy thought for a moment, that this was a very silly thing to do. But it was really sensible. He knew he could scramble up to the top of the bank among bushes and brambles without being seen, and he wanted to watch all things to see which way the witch's sled went. So remember, a lot of times the witch's sled had bells on it, and so they're hearing bells. The others all sat in the cave, wondering and wondering. They waited nearly 5 minutes. Then they heard something that frightened them very much. They heard voices. "Oh," thought Lucy, "he's been seen. She's caught him." Great, but do you guys remember that she said, "Take the bells off of the sled"? Do you guys remember that? Great was their surprise when a little later they heard Mr. Beaver's voice calling to them from just outside the cave. "It's all right," he was shouting. "Come out, Mrs. Beaver. Come out, sons and daughters of Adam. It's all right. It isn't her." This was bad grammar, of course, but that is not how beavers talk when they are excited. I mean, in Narnia, in our world, they usually don't talk at all. So Mr. Beaver and the children came bundling out of the cave, all blinking in the daylight, and with earth all around them, and looking very frosty and unbrushed and uncombed, and with the sleep still in their eyes. "Come on," cried Mr. Beaver, who was almost dancing with delight. "Come and see. This is a nasty knock for the witch. It looks as if her power is already crumbling." "What do you mean, Mr. Beaver?" panted Peter, as they all scrambled up the steep bank of the valley together. "Didn't I tell you," said Mr. Beaver, "that she's made it always winter and never Christmas? Didn't I tell you? Well, just come and see." And then they were all at the top and did see. It was a sled, and it was reindeer with bells, but they were far bigger than the witch's reindeer, and they were not white, but brown, and on the sled sat a person whom everyone knew the moment they set eyes on him. He was a huge man with a bright red robe, bright as holly berries, with a hood that had fur inside, and a great white beard that fell like a waterfall over his chest. So he's really big, he's got a red coat, and he has a white beard. Everyone knew him because though you could see people of sort only in Narnia, you see pictures of them all around the world on this side of the wardrobe door. But when you really see them in Narnia, it is rather different. Some of the pictures of Father Christmas, so they're saying that this is Santa Claus, that Santa Claus has come. And do you guys remember what they used to say about winter, that it's always winter, never Christmas? And Santa Claus just showed up, which means that in Narnia, it's Christmas right now. But now that the children stood looking at him, they didn't find it quite like that. He was so big and so glad and so real that they all became quite still. They felt very glad, but also solemn. "I've come at last," he said. "She has kept me out for a long time, but I have got in at last. Aslan is on the move. The witch's magic is weakening." So even Santa Claus knows that Aslan's on the move. Aslan's on the move. And Lucy felt running through that to the deep shiver of gladness which you only get if you are being solemn and still. "And now," said Father Christmas, so they're calling him Father Christmas in Narnia, we would call him Santa Claus, "for your presents. There is a new and better sewing machine for you, Mrs. Beaver. I will drop it in your house as I pass." "If you please, sir," said Mrs. Beaver, making a curtsy. "It's locked up right now." "Locks and bolts make no difference to me," said Father Christmas. "And as for you, Mr. Beaver, when you get home, you will find your dam finished and mended, and all the leaks and stops, and a new sliced gate fitted." Mr. Beaver was so pleased that he opened his mouth very wide and then found he couldn't say anything at all. "Peter, Adam's son," said Father Christmas. "Yes, sir," said Peter. "These are your presents," was the answer, "and they are tools, not toys. The time to use them is perhaps near at hand. Bear them well." With these words, he handed Peter a shield and a sword. So Santa Claus is giving Peter a shield and a sword, not like presents. The shield was the color of silver, and across it there was a red lion, as bright as a ripe strawberry at the moment when you pick it. The hilt of the sword was of gold, and it had a sheath and a sword belt and everything it needed. So like there's like a sword with it and a place for him to put it, like it's like a full set. And it was just the right size and weight for Peter. Peter was silent and solemn as he received these gifts, for he felt they were a very serious kind of present. "Susan, Eve's daughter," said Father Christmas, "these are for you." And he handed her a bow and a quiver full of arrows and a little ivory horn. "You must use the bow only in great need," he said, "for I do not mean you to fight in the battle. It does not easily miss. And when you put this horn to your lips and blow it, then, whenever you are, I think help of some kind will come to you." So he's giving her a bow and arrow and like a horn to blow in. But he said something important. He said, "I don't want you to fight in this fight." So he just said, there's going to be a fight, but Susan, I don't want you fighting in it. So these arrows that I'm giving you, they don't miss, but don't use them in the battle. And then he gave her a horn. He said, if you blow it, help will come. That's really important. Remember that. Last of all, he said, "Lucy, Eve's daughter," and Lucy came forward. He gave her a little bottle of what looked like glass, but people said afterward that it was made of diamond, and a small dagger. A dagger is like a knife, so he gave her a small knife and a little bottle. "In this bottle," he said, "there is a cordial made of juice from one of the fire flowers that grows in the mountains of the sun. If you or any of your friends are hurt, a few drops of this will restore them, and the dagger is to defend yourself at great need, for you are also not to be in the battle." So again, there's going to be a battle, but he says, "Lucy, this dagger's for you and it will protect you, but you're not going to fight in this battle either." So apparently there's a battle coming up, and he didn't say that to Peter, so Peter's fighting in it, but to Susan and Lucy, he said, "You're not going to be fighting in this," which is really, really important because they do something really important. "Why, sir," said Lucy, I don't know, but I think I could be brave enough." So Lucy's saying, why can't I fight in the battle? Because I'm brave. I can fight in this. "That is not the point," he said, "but battles are ugly when women fight." And now when he says that, it's kind of the same idea of why when there's a draft, only men fight in it. He kind of says, I don't want women to be in this battle. Like, we're going to let the men do that, which you can agree with, you can not agree with, but that's just kind of what he said. And now, here he suddenly looked less grave. Here is something for all of you for the moment. And he brought out, I suppose from the big sack at his back, but nobody saw him quite do it, a large tray containing 5 cups and saucers, a bowl of sugar, a jug of cream, and a green big teapot all sizzling and piping hot. Then he cried out, Merry Christmas! Long live the true king! And the true king, if you remember, is Aslan. And cracked his whip, and he and the reindeer and the sled and all they were out of sight before anyone realized that they had started to leave. Peter had just drawn his sword out of it, so he had just taken the sword out and was looking at it, and was showing it to Mr. Beaver when Mrs. Beaver said, now then, don't stand there talking till the tea's got cold. Just like men. Come and help to carry the tray down and we'll have breakfast. What a mercy I thought of bringing the bread knife. So down the steep bank they went and back to the cave, and Mr. Beaver cut some of the bread and ham into sandwiches, and Mrs. Beaver poured out the tea, and everyone enjoyed themselves. But long before they had finished enjoying themselves, Mr. Beaver said, time to be moving on. And that's the end of that chapter. You guys didn't think Santa Claus was getting involved in this, did you? Ha! And the next chapter is called, chapter 11 is called Aslan is Nearer. Okay. That's the end of that chapter. Okay, I will attach a flip grid for you guys. What are you guys thinking?